Hello there. PodLayer is an independent research project which focuses on observing subtle but specific human aesthetic qualia, trying to see what connections can be made regarding their various patterns. PodLayer practice is divided into 5 degrees of experimenting in order to test its forensic and theoretical assertions. Degrees 2 through 5 deal with speculations based on empirical observation experiments done with the naked eye. These more speculative degrees, 2 through 5, are not a focus as far as sharing with the public. The first degree is the focus of public experimentation, as it is comprised of these empirical observation experiments previously mentioned that are the forensic evidence being put forth for the public at large to take a look at and see what they can make of it. You'll be experimenting to see if you can observe certain patterns and physiological cues of the human face that can make for subtle aesthetic qualia categories to be noted, including what these cues and category of cues might be, how they group together, and what potential import might that have. The Mojos phenomenon is the name given to the discovery that there are 16 specialized innate aesthetic qualia categories of humans that can be observed through subtle innate physiological cues that people continuously produce. This can be noted with the naked eye once properly trained. Humans are better at subtle face and body physiological cue identification, such as microexpressions, than computers are, and therefore it is this kind of human lens that is employed in these experiments. The first experiment is to show you something you can likely already do to some degree without any prior training. This will introduce you to the lens within yourself you will be using to make your observations throughout this experiment and any future experiments you may wish to try out. The data being used in this experiment are visual samples of faces of a selection of various famous people. The goal is to better understand humans, as there are patterns of importance once seen, such as career demographics as well as relationship patterns in general, and it suggests what might drive these things, which merits further investigation. Before we begin this experiment, it is good to ask if this is the kind of experiment you want to take part in, as you are both the observer and the instrument of observing. It is very helpful if you find humans very interesting in general, and particularly if watching them is something you find very interesting. This means it is more likely that you will have the kind of inner lens that is required for these experiments, which includes having a self-motivated drive to visually observe people. In addition to this keen interest in observing your fellow humans, it is also helpful if you have already built up a visual library in your mind's eye of a large amount of humans. This can be anything from a career as a community organizer or simply having watched a lot of TV shows. If whatever size of virtual village you have in your mind is also something that you have quizzed yourself on for fun, to yourself or with friends, this is another positive indicator. Quizzing in this context is any kind of visual people grouping recognition, such as pointing out everyone in so-and-so's family, or naming all the actors who would be a good fit to play a certain character. This instinct, habit, and pre-training of virtual village group distinction quizzing is quite helpful. It is also helpful if you are highly motivated to find patterns of connection between all humans, while being realistic about the fact that humans also have innate differences as well. You will want to be able to handle mind-expanding what-if propositions, as there are many potentially massive whoa moments that may occur during later experiments, and possibly even during this first one if you are particularly sensitive to the patterns being observed. One more important quality is the ability to concentrate on subtle observations. It is therefore highly recommended that you be in the most conducive headspace and environment possible, devoid of distractions, in order to get the most benefit from the experiment. For those interested in seeing what PodLayer research has to offer, here is the first experiment, which has a few stages that hopefully you can make it all the way through. We'll be working on distinguishing between elongation of face versus fullness of face. This is a good place to start because it is a distinction that people tend to find easier as it is less subtle than the others, as is a cue that includes the entire face. Alright, go to the Rosetta Stone of the Human Soul website. The link is below in the description. We'll be working on a series of collages which can be selected from the main screen of the sample server program once you open it up from the navigation bar. Alright then, go to the Rosetta Stone of the Human Soul website. The link is below in the description box. We'll be working with a series of collages which can be selected from the main screen of the sample server program once you open it up from the navigation bar. The physiological cues of the Mojos phenomenon can be noted in both genders, but as the cues are subtle, It is best to isolate variables as much as possible, so you'll want to perform this experiment selecting either male or female samples. From here on in, the experiment, it is a given you are working with either male or female samples throughout. You will select the following samples to work with, all 8 subjective qualia categories, A-grade samples in alphabetical order in tour mode of 100 samples. The 8 subjective qualia categories you need to select will be listed below in the description box. You are to look for a subtle quality of elongation of the face. These faces have many differences, but they will all share this elongation quality. Click through the 100 samples to see if you can note it. This usually takes between 2 to 15 minutes, but take whatever time feels right for you. If you are able to see these physiological cue distinctions, proceed to the next stage. Next, you will start a new collage. You will select the following samples to work with, all 8 objective qualia categories, A-grade samples in alphabetical order in tour mode of 100 samples. The 8 objective qualia categories you need to select will be listed in the description box below. You are to look for a subtle quality of fullness of the face. These faces have many differences, but they all share this fullness quality. Click through the 100 samples to see if you think you can note it. Again, take whatever time feels right for you. If you are able to see these physiological cue distinctions, proceed to the next stage. Start a new collage. Choose the subjective versus objective buttons. You will select the following samples to work with. All 16 qualia categories, A-grade samples in alphabetical order in quiz mode of 200 samples. Click through selecting whether or not you think the sample you see has the elongated face qualia, in which case you press the subjective button, or the fuller face qualia, in which case you press the objective button. If you receive a score of 75% or more, you can proceed to the next stage. If not, you can stop the experiment here, or you can retake this quiz until 75% or more is achieved. For the next stage, wait at least 1 day and up to 1 week to recover your lens strength and build your appetite back up for this kind of visual quizzing, while still having these visual distinctions being observed look like still fresh in your mind. When you're ready, start a new collage. You'll select the following samples to work with. All 16 qualia categories, A-grade samples in alphabetical order in quiz mode of 300 to 500 samples. Click through, selecting whether or not you think the sample you see has the elongated face qualia, subjective button, or the fuller face qualia, objective button. The first 200 samples will be somewhat familiar and should build your confidence and help get your lens dialed in to making this distinction. Continue on to complete the quiz, seeing how many of the remaining samples you can properly distinguish. This quiz is more challenging as it is longer, but more importantly, the samples are less familiar to you, so you are relying more on your ability to distinguish elongated versus fuller face. If you receive a score of 75% or more, you can proceed to the next stage. If not, you can stop the experiment here, or you can retake this quiz until 75% is achieved. For the final stage, wait at least a day and up to a week to allow your lens to internalize these visual cue distinctions while your memory of particular samples starts to fade away. When you're ready, start a new collage. You'll select the following samples to work with. All 16 qualia categories, A-grade samples in random order in quiz mode of 200 samples. Click through, selecting whether or not you think the samples you see has the elongated face qualia or the fuller face qualia. These samples being random means there will be no warm-up for your lens of previously prepped samples. More of these samples will therefore be unfamiliar, and what the visual distinctions being looked for are will need to be pulled directly from your own Virtual Village library. If you receive a score of 75% or more, you can proceed to the next experiment. Simply put a link to a screenshot of your quiz results for confirmation. You are the lens that did this, and you did it by flexing it in a way to identify differences in aesthetic character based on a subtle quality of categorization. In this case, the difference between elongated face as compared to fuller face. If you are interested in doing any extra credit to help internalize the lessons learned better, feel free to repeat this quiz using larger sample sizes, adding in both genders. At the end of this experiment, there are a few questions to ask. Can you see these physiological cues with significant regularity, i.e., did you get 75% or higher on them? Did you find it interesting to try to make these visual distinctions as an exercise, as in, is watching humans for subtle cues enjoyable for you? Did you find it interesting that these distinctions are there to be noted, as in, was there satisfaction felt when you looked for these distinctions with your lens and your lens was able to find them? Do you think that these cues you have now noted might mean something? As in, are you inclined to look for these cues in people you see going forward, to see where and how often these distinctions might continue to show up? And does noting these distinctions arouse a strong curiosity in you to see what other patterns of subtle physiological cue distinctions there might be? If you can answer yes to these questions, then you are ready to try further experiments. Going forward, we'll be looking at a variety of specific kinds of subtle physiological cues, noting how many ones there are and what combinations they show up in. The difficulty of observing these physiological cues will increase as the experiments proceed. At first, this will come from learning new cues to observe that are smaller and more subtle. These more challenging cues will still be noted from within the A-grade samples. Much later on, the more overall difficult B, C, and D grade samples will be introduced, which increases the overall challenge for noting any of the cues in general. Spotting the cues in the B, C, and D grade samples should not be attempted without achieving fluency in spotting a wide variety of cues from the A grade samples. After posting your screenshot, feel free to ask any related follow-up questions you may have. Please note, however, that questions about higher pod layer theory or other off-topics in general will not be focused on, but rather we will be focusing on increasing one's ability to visually track the physiological cues of the Mojo phenomenon. This is a space for people who want to try out noting these physiological cues and talk about the process and what they are seeing. Any feedback on what the experience was like for you is appreciated, whether it is positive, negative, or neutral. Alright, I look forward to hearing any feedback from those who are willing to try out this first pod layer experiment.